Leadership Story Talks, where we discuss the practices that engage, motivate, develop, retain, and attract people to businesses. We'll give you principles and tools based on real-world stories to leverage listening and storytelling to become a better leader and management professional. Leadership Story Talks is produced by Narativ, a company that focuses on personal storytelling for business.
Welcome to Leadership Story Talks. I am Jerome CEO of Narativ.
And I'm Julienne Ryan, J. Ryan Partners, Be Engaged at Work, and happy to be here, my partner in crime here, or a partner in storytelling, I should say.
Right. Hi, Jules. Nice to see you. And today, we want to talk about the power of saying no. We recently had a guest who said, I say yes to everything, and that prompted us to think about what about the flip side of that. So let's talk about the power of saying no. Where do you want to begin with this, Jules?
I met somebody years ago who gave me was sharing guidance that she had used for her children, saying that she had learned that if you can learn how to say no, life can be a lot easier about managing that particular relations. In this case, it was being a parent, but it always stayed with me because I thought that is such a tough lesson to learn for myself, as well as for many people that I coach, is that experience of saying no when things are uncomfortable or not sitting right, or you're overwhelmed, like navigating that word of getting through that point, basically. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about it.
Yeah, and taking that risk, because I think that's one of the reasons that we maybe don't say no, is that it feels risky, just like we may not say yes to something right away, and we sort of have to kind of figure out what's going on internally. What am I feeling about this? But you've got to have the wherewithal to actually take that step back. I mean, that question of when you brought it up before the podcast, it made me think of an experience that I'd had, all the way back in 2015. We at Narativ had decided, funnily enough, we invested quite a bit of money into and resources, hired some people that were specialists in this, to creating a podcast division. So we had actually created 4 podcast series from scratch. And the idea behind it, back in 2012 or 2013, there was this huge podcast called Serial, which broke all kinds of records.
Oh, yes, I remember. Okay.
True crime kind of story, broke all kinds of records, and it really put podcasts on the map. Suddenly people were listening to podcasts who'd never listened to podcasts. And of course, all these different podcasts started to emerge. Many of them actually were business podcasts as well. And they were doing really, really well, so well that advertisers were paying a lot of money. And so we thought, we're storytellers, we've got the expertise. And so let's see if we can branch out. Instead of working with clients only, let's go and produce things ourselves. And at first it was great. We got a bunch of people to work on it. We created these 4 really fantastic series, and we started to have listeners. And about a year in, I remember a meeting where I was looking at a spreadsheet with the person who was heading up that division, who was really in charge of all of it. And we're looking at the spreadsheet, and at the bottom, there was a red row. And I'm looking at him, and I'm saying, I think we've got another 6 months until we really figure this advertising thing out. And he said, I'm not worried, we're growing, I'm sure it's going to come. And then we get to 2016, I think maybe even 2017. And again, I'm in front of this spreadsheet, and the row is, if it's possible to be more red, it would be. And I say, look, we just can't continue. We can't go on. And I've got a big lump in my throat, And a few days later, I'm in the office, and one by one, I'm shaking these producers' hands. 5 people that we'd hired, and I'm saying, thanks for everything you've done. And one of them looks at me and says, thanks for the opportunity. Another one is also very positive, and then another one says, narrative will always fail. And Lynn leaves. And
Okay.
then they leave the office, and I just, breathe a big sigh, and I just put my head in my hands. A year later, I'm sitting in that same office, and now it's a team of 4 people,
Mm-hmm.
including the founder of Narativ, who we talk a lot about here, Murray Nossel.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard the origin stories of Narativ. And now I'm looking at the spreadsheet, and the last row is black. And there's another row underneath that says profit. And one of my, Sasha at the time, the director
Remember
of
him.
operations, he says, so I've got a few ideas for this, how we could reinvest. It wasn't a lot of money, but how we could kind of put that back into. And Murray says, well, what about this project that I've been working on for the last couple of years? I wonder if maybe now's the time to invest in it. And I took a beat, and I knew that it was sort of a nonprofit thing, and I told him, we've managed to come back from this. We now have our book that's out. It's all about business, it's all about leadership development, it's all about engagement, and we've really been super focused. I feel like we need to keep our focus there, so I have to say no. And he said, good, great, that's clear. So I wanted to, that's the story that came back to me as we were talking about the power of saying no, because that was a very, as you can imagine, first of all, the way that I'm telling you the story is I'm not telling you anything about my emotions or feelings, which were
Correct.
extremely numerous.
Yes. Thank you for being honest about that, because it was very neutralized about, okay,
but
this
that's
happened, that happened.
And I want to highlight that is our method, right? Because unless you can sort of look at exactly the facts of the experience and not cloud it too much with your judgments, interpretations, and feelings, then your audience is really going to stay with you. So that was kind of the first point I wanted to make just for our audience right now, is that that's how we tell stories. And then on the back end, now that I've told it in a reflective mode, I can tell you that I had a lot of feelings, and I could have said more in the story as well, of just things that were happening in my body and the discomfort that I was feeling. But that was a very uncomfortable moment to say to someone who's the founder of the company that you run, no.
Yes, indeed.
And yet it was also really empowering. And it's one of the things that I am really proud of in terms of the culture of Narativ that we've created, is that there's a great sense of permission to do that. There's a sense of permission to say no when you feel like something isn't right. And why I have that sense of permission is because I know that the persons who are listening to me within the Narativ sort of business, we're all the same. We all follow that same value. And as a result, I know that no one is going to ignore that no, or no one's going to be resentful. And if they are, they're going to say it right away. Correct. And so we'll all be on the same page all the time, as opposed to someone kind of, feeling like, oh, well, that's terrible. I'm the founder. He should have said yes. And, that sort of thing. No, we'll have a frank conversation about it. So those were kind of the takeaways for me in terms of the power of saying no.
And that's one of the things that resonated when I first met the group, that you were actually talking about what was happening in the room and what was happening before, and what we were carrying in with the dialogue. Because myself, I know I've coached and I've worked with people to sort out challenges they're having. And part of it is listening to the dialogue that's happening inside, where we're not addressing this situation, what keeps festering. And a very wise gal that I know that does coaching said, she uses this expression and passed it on to me. She goes, if it's hysterical or AKA emotional, it's historical. So not just to look at the facts in front of you, but to kind of dial it back to what's contributing to us having a frank conversation. What do we think is going to happen? And then sometimes using a sounding board is really important, so we can step away and be objective. And that's the goal. And the good thing about our work, we can practice on ourselves a lot and find out where our weaknesses are. And you don't work with humans without having tests every day. We talk about every listening experience is a practice, because it's fresh and new. And sure enough, it's right. It is true. So listen to know and capturing how you can communicate. one of the things I've found is the thing that gets us into trouble when we say no is we don't own up to the fact we're uncomfortable, and then we over exercise our muscle, our mouth. We either are too hard because we're uncomfortable, so we want to get the message out there. And depending on your personality style, you become abrupt, maybe too cutting, too, you're not giving person a chance to say anything, or you go the other way. You're a little wishy-washy and being tentative. And I can't tell you how many conversations I had with coaching clients about staff and the amount of misinformation that came out of those tentative conversations was abundant and usually led to bigger problems. So I think the power of saying no helps. And then what other times have you come up with it when you've coached clients that you think might be interesting for everybody?
Yeah. Well, I remember this one person. I had done a group training with a client for Narativ, and and it was all about. It kind of ended on this high note of telling a future story. So the group, what they were working on, and their use of storytelling was translating the strategy into, that was the 3-year strategy, into something that their teams could understand. And so storytelling was sort of the natural way to do it. What's a story that I can tell that's going to translate this strategy and show them what the future is going to be like? And so they were working on this quite hard, and then everyone told stories about the future. It was kind of cool because I remember it was May 2022, and they said each person started their story with, it's May, whatever the date was, 2025. And here's where I am, and then you kind of rewind to May 2022.
Oh, cool.
And how you started, right? So you could hear all these steps. And this one guy was really inspired by that. And he actually came to me and he was pretty honest. And he said, I feel like I didn't do as well as my colleagues and I want to get better. Can we work together? And it was the last day of the training. So I said, well, we're going to have to do it one-on-one because this is all I've got. And, and so we did. And then about a session or two in, he told me that he had this a business that he was thinking of creating. And when I pressed him a little bit more about that, he said, well, actually, it's been created and it's been around for a year already. It's not officially launched, but I've got a team in place that I've started to informally work with, but I'm also keeping my job as a pretty high executive in this company. And about a couple more sessions in, and so we're talking about the story for that business, and then comes back again and he says, I'm at a point where I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed because essentially I work a lot, and then once I'm done with that work, I work on my business, sometimes into the early hours or in the dead of night, and I've got a family, so this isn't sustainable. And he said, I think it's time for me to consider saying no to either one of those things. And so we worked more, and then what we found was that there was an underlying emotion that was pretty strong, and that had to do with health, and and mental health in particular, because he was a very physically healthy guy, did a lot of sports, exercised all the time, but he said, this is really weighing on me. I'm not sleeping very well, and mentally I'm not doing great. And that's when we kind of determined, well, what's the best thing for you? And the hesitation was, well, I've got this financial stability because I've been at this job for a long time and I actually enjoy it. But on the other hand, the thing that really excites me is what I've been working on for a year now. And now I'm starting to have a team, and some people are considering coming in. I've got an investor that's ready to go. And so eventually, I think it took another session, but finally he said, and I didn't push him in any particular direction. We just talked about all these things, but it all had to do with what's behind that no. Because he had two choices. He could say no to one thing or no to the other thing. So he had to choose which one. And finally, he decided, I'm going to go with the business that I want to create. And that was about a year ago. And now a year later, he couldn't be happier. As a matter of fact, we're going to continue working together at the end of the month, specifically on that business and the story of that business. But it's really that idea of like, I know I need to say no to something. But it's really hard because either one is not going to be ideal. It's not going to have, it's not the perfect answer. And yet something has to give, right? So it was weighing what were the more powerful emotions that needed to kind of be taken care of, and for him, eventually what he decided to do was that for his mental health, it would be better to go with that dream. And it took a little while, but he did it.
I think you need a t-shirt. I help people say no.
That's right.
But for a good purpose. I think that is the balance, but it's so interesting in this coaching world. We're always curating and listening for keywords, what drives it. Now, if I was coaching you, you're coming in saying, tell me about yourself working. You've given me in these podcasts examples of where you've really stood out and said no for good purpose, not to be contrary, for bridging the communication gap. I can't remember which podcast is which at this point, but you told one executive to put his phone down now you said it without realizing the person who had his phone up in his hand in a session was the person who was signing your check and leading the project. So that was a courageous a little unintentional at the beginning, but a no that you stood by it. Then this time you told Murray no. Project. So it seems like something you've developed a very good thing. So right. That might be something you want to start putting on the website. But it is true to kind of take a step back in that objectivity to say it's never always easy. There's an internal churning that happens, but to pay attention and not to sidestep it. Because when we do, it creates maybe bigger issues. So, and finding some humor along the way of how we're showing up is always a good thing.
Right.
So what do you think? What do you think about that feedback that I just gave you?
I love it. I think it's interesting. And, it's really interesting because what it just kind of prompted was that it's always been hard for me to say no. So that's something I worked on. And that was highlighted to me years ago, as something I needed to work on. And so I'm giving you those instances, right? And it's kind of interesting to hear now, well, yeah, that has been pivotal in a few ways, and created a sense of direction. And I wonder and so for me, it's much easier to say yes. Like I'm really good at saying yes. And it makes me wonder, I think I know people in my life for whom it's much easier to say no, and how that's having adverse effects. Because that's just how you show up. It's just, oh, I know when to say no, I'm just going to do it, and sometimes it's actually not great because you're stopping yourself perhaps from,
experiencing
following
a new thing,
a certain opportunity, and experiencing something new, whatever it might be, So I would invite our audience to think about that it's not like we're saying you got to say no all the time, but rather, who are you, and what is that? Do you have any awareness of where you prefer to be? Are you someone who prefers to say yes? Or are you someone who prefers to say no? And can you think of experiences where maybe saying that same thing all the time, maybe it hasn't been super productive or effective for you in certain areas? And I still say yes to so many things, and I'm a big believer in saying yes.
Absolutely.
But I know that I've got to inject some no from time to time.
Yeah. So it's who's writing the script is always my expression. It's my prompt, and listening, and then having a good sounding board to, friend, colleague to play with the idea and figure out where's the opportunities that are going to be like you said, open up or lost. Lots of choices though, right? I wish it could just everything be linear, but it's not that simple. And God knows our life gives us great incentives and ideas for these podcasts. Like, what do we want to solve and do better, as we say in New York, and figure it out. So that's what's great. So I'm curious to hear about people's examples and what they're saying, if they can in print, or just write to us privately too. And we'd love to learn from you.
Yeah, we'd love to learn from you. And yes, are you a person who says yes, no, maybe a little bit of both? And how do you do that? What's that underlying emotion that you're responding to when you say yes or no? Because I think that's kind of the point here, is to pay attention to that. So yeah, well, this is great. Thanks, Jules, for all your feedback on my stories here.
Yes. It's muscles we have to exercise. We have to figure out how to use them and why.
Absolutely. So the three things I want to leave people with, and certainly hear your thoughts as well, Jules. But the three things I've got are, and one I just alluded to, but that first one of paying attention to that underlying emotion when something is coming at you and you've got that first impulse of either it's a no or it's a yes or it's neutral. What's before you actually say the word no, yes, or nothing, just sort of see what's going on, right? Like what's the feeling? Yeah, what's the feeling? Is it comfort, discomfort? What is it? What's that tension? And then, don't hesitate to kind of think about it before you go, but pay attention to that underlying emotion, because if you don't, and you sort of choose to sweep something under the rug, that could really have some adverse effects, and not be so productive for you. So that's the first thing.
Absolutely. Correct.
And then the second thing is something you just alluded to as well, the sounding board, about that dialogue and noticing, who's writing the script and the dialogue you have with your inner voice. And, what are you following? Are you following a habit? Are you following something new? Is it exciting? What is it? And so I think just that dialogue is really important, and taking the time to identify.
Maybe change out some of the cast members once in a while who's writing that dialogue inside of you. Give somebody else a little stand-in role and test it out. What is the opportunities we can pursue if we said yes or no in whatever instant we're working on?
Right. And then the last one I've got is courage. That's my word, because once you've determined, what that feeling is, what the dialogue is, then you're going to take an action. And I think it's the courage to follow through with whatever has come up, however uncomfortable it might be, but knowing with the long view that ultimately this is going to be good for you. It takes courage to actually take that step, whatever the step is, and however incremental it might be. So don't judge yourself, and have the courage to just move forward with what you've discovered and follow through.
And that resonates with me, dialing back to other situations where I had to make tough decisions. I think people appreciate when the decisions to say no or impact others, ways of working, was grounded in something that was thought out, reasonable, and respectful. So that is a big thing.
Grounded, reasonable, respectful. I love that. That's great. So I am going to, I think we're leaving it at that for today. And
absolutely.
And to say to our listeners, whatever ideas you have, what comes up in your life when you say yes or when you say no, and what are those feelings that are going on? If you have any examples or experiences you want to share with us, please do so. We're always available. And if you've been inspired by our session yourself to learn more about what we do at Narativ around listening and storytelling, we've got a session that starts on September 7, when we are going to do a 3-part online workshop series. And you can go to our website, narativ.com, narativ.com, to find out more, to register there and learn more about how you can find, craft, and tell a powerful leadership story of your own in a safe and supportive environment over the course of 3 one-hour sessions, all online and remote at a time that is convenient for everyone.
Yes, show up for that for sure, and how we can lead ourselves. But if you prefer a more private venue, or to deal with things that are very, very targeted, do reach out to us for private sessions and coachings and workshops. We're always available to talk and listen and partner with you so you can craft your way through solutions. And it's always exciting to see that happen. We, as you know, from all our conversations.
Yeah. We'd love to have you. So, and as always, thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and leave a review, because that's how we get word of mouth. And also remember that we've got a YouTube channel where this is posted.
Yes,
so
you can see our faces.
So exactly, if you want to see our faces and the faces of our guests, all of our episodes are there. So then until next time, thanks so much, Jules, for co-hosting with me.
Thanks. Well done.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everybody.
Cheers.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narativ.com.